Many nights, as I wash the dishes, I listen to the daily podcast from the New York Times. It's just part of my routine. The dogs even know it. They go to the couch and sigh because they know I'm going to be there for a while. Some weeks ago, the focus was on the resignation of A.O. Stone, one of the film critics for the Times. You see, he resigned as a protest against superheroes. Well, actually, it was the fans of superheroes. It seems he fell foul of the social media fandom of the Marvel Universe with a review about one of the Avengers films in which he described it as part of a genre of, quote, movies featuring troubled guys wearing costumes and fighting evil. He did his own exit interview published last month, and he said, "Fan culture is rooted in conformity, obedience, group identity, and mob behavior, and its rise mirrors and models the spread of intolerance, authoritarian, aggressive tendencies in our politics and our communal life." I think that's a different sermon. This was intriguing. Though that we make and break one another without cause is hardly news in this day. What was more intriguing was the question of why these films are so appealing to people in our time. Why is it that people will come to, it seems like, an endless supply of them? Fortunate for me, I have some experts in my own family. For I knew my daughter, Garner, and my son-in-law would give me a good perspective about this whole issue, especially around Marvel. Personally, I watch them because they're fun, silly, and stunningly visual. Garner, my daughter, and more importantly, OT's mom said. As for the ones I think are actually good movies, like Black Panther or Spider-Verse, they use the superhero framework to subvert expectations and say something real about the world. For example, with Black Panther, both T'Challa and Killmonger's perspectives are totally understandable. And if you haven't seen the movie, they have very different perspectives. You could see how they would come to such different conclusions about the world based on each of their lived experiences. It's compelling, and it's nuanced. And Patrick, heretofore known as OT's dad, adds, "What appeals about a superhero story is just the hero's journey. Naturally, I'd use Star Wars as my example. The hero rises from obscurity, sees an injustice, and is compelled to act at considerable risk to themselves. With the hero coming from nowhere, it suggests that the hero can be anybody, and that an audience member can see themselves in the hero, perhaps compelling them to do good and caring about events bigger than themselves that affect a multitude." I don't think any of us would question that in this time we need heroes. And with all due respect to A.O. Stone, I much prefer the heroes that are a little troubled, because the other kind are just pure fiction, in my mind. If heroes do compel us to act, if that magnification helps us see our own largeness, then more power to them. The world seems to be losing interpretive imagination, though. And in that context, I do worry about the idea of superheroes who are all otherworldly, or people who can't imagine a connection to their actions in this world, which so needs us to act in so many ways. I'm going to be truthful that some of the most heroic people I have known have never had their name in lights. They may have never even spoken in public. They've just made the best choices they could with whatever they have to save themselves or their loved ones. This includes people who have traveled from Guatemala or Honduras because their life depended on it, in countries wrecked both by global economics and the rising temperatures that climate change is causing, which is also causing additional rises in violence and gangs, as there's violent wrestling for control of increasingly scarce resources. Veterans of war who must wrestle with the consequences that live in their bodies. Veterans of households where there wasn't enough love or where there was also violence. Professionals who risked their lives for us just a few short years ago, like medical professionals and others, and yet now are experiencing what the survivors of war have known for a long time, how people are quick to celebrate the glory, but they often turn away in the aftermath. People who've led the way, being who they are, women who want to contribute or claim the autonomy of their own spirit and body, those with sexual orientations or gender expressions others find threatening, people who've been willing to get sober after a long period of addiction to substances such as opioids, alcohol, bad relationships, food, gambling, debt, people who've been willing to start their lives over again, 1 hour at a time, people who have struggled against mental or physical challenges, who've had to figure out what their life was after the loss of someone they thought was the foundation of their existence. And those, like OT's parents, the parents of my grandchild, who take on parenting as a conscious choice in this roiling time. And I've also watched the heroics of people who stay connected to the groups and communities they believe in, despite losses and changes, which seem inevitable these days. When I was in my 20s, I had the opportunity to meet a group of young journalists from Poland. Their nation had just been emerging after the Iron Curtain had fallen, and they were so jubilant to come and find out what it means to live in a society with a free press. And I was a fairly newly minted journalist at that time, working for a small town newspaper where most of my life was reporting on things that really didn't matter with people who really didn't care, and taking a lot of pictures that I would develop in the darkroom all night, every night on Mondays before we went to press. We were still using some aspects of manual layout at those days, which involved precisely placing very sticky things in exactly the right place. It was not glamorous, and it was too common to find the headline for the lead story, like somehow stuck to your Diet Coke. It did not feel like it was defending democracy, and so it was so wonderful to have these visitors who felt that what I did every week was glamorous. They were almost starstruck by the democracy that we then took for granted. Any of those acts for them was life-risking, even then. The thing is, I believe that we are so more often like Custard the dragon, who finds that little spark of the hero in us when we really need it. And if cultivated, it can be fanned into a larger flame that can make a difference in our lives and in the lives of others. If you go to enough celebrations of life and hear enough eulogies, and just for the record, I would be glad to say uncle on this, you start to realize that almost everybody has some kind of superpower. They ask really good questions. They never question. They're very accepting. They accept questions. They bake to avoid questions, and they're really good at it. The end result is unquestionably good, whatever that superpower, however small it might be. So I suspect if you take a moment, you'll realize that you've known some heroes too. And we need to continue to recognize this. The people willing to act despite the great odds, to use those small gifts in the betterment of others, to be heroic and face what's happening to our children, to our democracy, to our planet, to our mental and social health, which seems in its own crisis. And then maybe to act, to write that letter, even if it means thinking about how much violence our children face now. Or to take that Red Cross Narcan class, even if you're afraid to imagine using that treatment. To come to the Party for the Planet that we're having the second week of June and face your own fears about climate change. To get involved in electoral politics, where the stakes continue to be very high, to face that addiction or that depression or that anxiety that doesn't seem to be going away, even though the world is changing. This is a faith question for us in the tradition of William Ellery Channing, who spoke the first sermon on Unitarian Christianity. It was controversial because it spoke of the agency of human beings. Yes, he also spoke of God, but he focused on a different kind of God that was not omnipotent, a God who needed all of us to take that little spark among ourselves and set it alight. Channing said, faith is love taking the form of aspiration, and to act on that aspiration is indeed a heroic choice. As Les and Nasa have said, a hero is someone we want to follow, an artist, a prophet. That's always been the source of a lot of imaginational leadership, and they can help us face the kind of problems we have that do sometimes feel like they need superhuman strength to face. This is a new twist on the hero's journey that was mentioned in our chalice lighting by Linda and that Les mentioned as well. It was the stuff of many classes on Bill Moyer's teachings that I remember that were happening when I joined UUism as a young adult way back in the day. These times, though, do require a new twist. So if I go back to my expert witnesses, who did give me permission to quote them, by the way, OT's mom suggests sci-fi and fantasy are so appealing because it's a chance to imagine a world that's different and better. If we're building an imaginary world, let's build one where people are their best, where BIPOC folks and women, trans, non-binary people are powerful and safe and provide visions of how we can be better and stronger together. Some years ago, Garner introduced me to the dystopian Afrofuturist Octavia Butler, who wrote like a prophet in The Parable of the Sower, which was published in 1993, and who died in poverty, though her words are so prophetic today. Listen to them. When apparent stability disintegrates, as it must, God is change. People tend to give in to fear and depression, to need and greed. When no influence is strong enough to unify people, they divide, they struggle one against one, group against group, for survival, position, power. They remember the old hates and generate new ones. They create chaos and nurture it. They kill and kill and kill until they're exhausted and destroyed, or until they're conquered by outside forces, or until one of them becomes a leader most will follow, or a tyrant most fear. Prophetic words indeed. So where do I come down on this after these months of thinking about this topic? Marvel is probably too big and dominant and playing into a desire for escapism, which is what movies do anyway, and that's important too, and some change and inspire lives. What really matters to me the most, as I think about this, is the distortion that it's just about the individual, the superhero unitary, and not about each of us doing our part in relationship with each other, in communities that remind us that our powers are needed. And so our mutual heroism inspires us each to use our unique gifts. These are Channing's words again. Great minds are to make others great. Their superiority is to be used not to break the multitude, to intellectual vassalage, not to establish over them a spiritual tyranny, but to rouse them from lethargy and to aid them to judge for themselves. Intellectual vassalage is not that easy to say, I might say. Probably easier in Channing's time. But here's the generational amendment from Octavia Butler. There is no end to what a living world will demand of you. So let us take a moment as we finish together to remember our love for this world and how we want to use our own powers, even if they're ordinary and not that super, to keep it living. Let's be heroes together. Wouldn't that be super?